must emphasize that I do not represent the youth of this country. I'm too old for that. And the fact that in many ways I do represent the youth of the country in most of the rooms I walk into is an indictment on where we've gotten to as a country when about 40 million, I think it is, of the country's population is under the age of 40, which I'm about to be. So we need to have a lot of serious reflection on why 60% of this room is not young people. So I'm going to try and not get chased, but the chances are you're going to have to chase me. I promise I'm going to do my best. Earlier this year, I got to travel to the UK and then to the US to speak to activists from different parts of the world, the US, the UK, Slovenia, Chile, Brazil, and the US, and speak about what challenges many civil society activists are facing and how they're making sense of where we are in the politics, in the state of government, in the state of power in the world, and particularly the state of democracy. And the one thing that stood out for me in the various conversations that I've had is a theme that says that we don't have a political crisis or a governance crisis only, or an economic crisis only for that matter. Democracy is in crisis. And so when I say democracy is in crisis, that puts a little bit of a spanner in the works to the theme of the campaign that brings us here, defending democracy. And so my remarks are going to be a little bit uncomfortable giving the name Defend Our Democracy. Because the overall thing that I feel like I need to communicate today is that if we go into the next 6 to 8, 12 months before this 2024 election, defending democracy, we may actually find ourselves speaking to ourselves. The truth is that the broad majority of people who are citizens of many countries in the world that are democracies are disillusioned with democracy. And so when we say to people in communities, we're defending democracy, we may not realize that what they may be hearing is that we are saying defend the status quo. That we are saying we need to go back to a time where democracy was this or that. And the very things we're saying even that we need to go back to are things that people feel alienated from. So in Slovenia, a group of young feminist activists decided that they were going to need to leave the comforts of their intellectual spaces as university students and take to the communities and the streets of their country to have conversations with people about where their progressive politics lands in the face of everything else people are hearing and experiencing, and find a way to connect the experiences of people with the progressive politics they were engendering. And that led them to lead 3 referendums in their country that they led through civics, taking the citizenry on board and building a culture of debate and discussion rather than simply a culture of dragging the citizenry along. In the US, in Atlanta, Georgia, you had Stacey Abrams, N.C.A. Uford, John Taylor, and others in progressive black movements in the Trump moment, realizing that part of what was happening that was keeping people away from the polls or getting, the white middle class and the white working class to actually support a Trump movement was Trump was saying the establishment is broken and he was right. His motives were wrong. His politics is trash. But he wasn't wrong that the establishment politics was broken and not serving people and a compact of elites. And they had to go to community and register 700,000 new voters through a process of asking those voters, what do you want and who do you want? Rather than trying to sell them some sort of Democratic Party line. In Brazil, the new Lula moment didn't come because people saw in Lula a savior as they did the first time. It came because the very civil society organizations that were birthed from that first Lula moment had to turn around and look at Lula's party and say to Lula's party, you're on the wrong track. You have to fix this thing, and we're going to fix it by building capacity on the ground, building movements on the ground, debating, discussing, taking to the streets, and then collaborating when it's absolutely essential. And so what I'm asking for is not a defense of democracy, but an interrogation of democracy and an innovation of democracy. We must build a democracy that works for the majority of people in this country, or it will fail. In Malawi last year, when we were doing our democracy builders, one of the very first ones, we found ourselves in a cacophony of absolute just dismay. We walked into Wentworth, in the Wentworth Community Center, and we couldn't start our democracy builder because there was a protest happening outside of 16 and 17-year-olds in front of Wentworth High, protesting because the day before, a 15-year-old had stabbed another 15-year-old to death over a drug deal. And they were protesting because the school wanted to go on with school as usual. And the activists in the community were saying, well, this is drugs, it's got nothing to do with democracy. And we had to have a moment where we had to wrestle with what that meant. And I said to my team, we're not going to have a cute conversation about democracy while young people are outside protesting for their very lives. And then we watched political parties try and come and take over those young people's protests, their principals sitting inside, refusing to come out and meet them. And then finding out that the reason why they're so incensed is by April, when that was happening, 15 learners had died at that school. We can't have cute conversations about democracy without those learners. We will miss them. We will miss this entire society. Because when we got into being able to hold that workshop, a young man said to us, the reason why as young people we are not voting is because all this situation, post-94 situation has given us is a vote. We get a vote, they get the democracy. And for the last year, I kept on thinking that they get the democracy, is the politicians. And then I started to realize it's not only them, it's also us. We in civil society have gotten democracy, and that's why we can defend it. But the majority of citizens have not gotten any fruits of this democracy, including a voice. How do you mobilize when you're hungry? We have been asking people to mobilize hungry. We've been asking people to mobilize from sewage in the streets. And on the other hand, we're sitting in conferences saying we don't want to get our hands dirty in politics. I've never ever seen somebody clean sewage up with clean hands. If politics is dirty, we're going to have to get into a very dirty fight, and we're going to have to fight politically. We talk about our politics all the time, as long as we don't have to get into an actual political battle. There's so much of us that speaks about progressive politics. What is progressive politics? It can't just be debates. It can't just be us trying to be more right than the other person. It can't just be us faffing over which terminology is the best terminology. Our progressive politics is going to have to take us into spaces of discomfort, having conversations with people we don't like, wrestling for state power, because the one thing we're not going to be able to do is we must not give up on the state. We must not give up on the state. We must not give up on this government. We must not give up on that. And so when Pope Malefe talks about that coalition that looms, my problem isn't the coalition. Coalitions are a natural result of electoral outcomes. You can't avoid it or champion it. But we have to then say, we must make sure that the people who are going to form those coalitions are good quality people who are accountable to us. We must put them there and hire them and have the ability to fire them. That's why electoral reform is important. I am going to ask us to consider 4 things, and then I'm going to sit down, I promise. The first is, can we all agree that the time for resistance politics is over? You cannot shame shameless people into acting properly. You cannot resist a thing that's falling apart. Can we agree? Number 2, we need to reclaim agency. And by we, I mean all of the people of this country, not only those of us who get to be in elite spaces. We already have power. In fact, we must democratize the power in this room into every street in this country. You know why the people of this country would easily get up and go to a rally by a criminal? Because that criminal is at least listening to them. While we're turning our nose at people who we're calling xenophobes without even having had a conversation with them in a community meeting. Until we are ready to give over power to the people of this country bona fide, and that's us, civil society, we will continue to have them in the clutches of people who have bad intentions and even poorer politics, because they at least went to go listen. So let's agree that we're going to give back power and agency to communities. Be willing to be led by them, take our legitimacy from communities and communities only, and especially young people, as Popolo Molefe said. It is not only enough that we sit as equals in the rooms with young people when they are there. We must take a principled stance to be led by the young people of this country. We must all be willing to be led by 25-year-olds, 35-year-olds, 30-year-olds, 21-year-olds. If they could lead themselves in Fees Must Fall, why do we not think they can lead us? They can lead themselves in keeping communities going every day. Then we say they can't lead us. We must question why we are not ready to be led by young people in this country. We must realign our conversations and our conversation partners. Our conversations must no longer be about the past, they must be about the future. And we cannot only talk to people who sound and look like us. We must be willing to have difficult conversations with people we fundamentally disagree with. Business, unions, the corrupt parties, the non-corrupt parties, people who are anti-capitalist, the capitalists themselves, we're all going to have to start having difficult conversation. The battle of ideas is not the battle between one good idea and another good idea. We have to convince people with bad ideas to have good ideas rather than turning our noses at them because they don't share our ideas. Can we agree on that? And so the final thing that I'm going to say is in the lead up to 2024, civil society must play an active role in getting this country ready to choose its future government. We must be on the side of citizens, on the side of voters. We must give people the ability to talk through their political choices. 2024 must be a group project. And we must all play our part and have conversations about it. Nobody in a group project ever says, okay, the 5 of us is in a group project, we will only see each other again on the day that we submit the assignment. We're not going to talk about it. We must start talking about our vote, talking about who we're voting for, why we're not voting, what the merits are, how we strategically vote better. But this thing that we're not talking about voting and the quality of our options must stop. That's how we'll get surprised by a coalition, because the thing that's most in our hands, the ability to choose our leaders, we're trying to pretend like it's something that we can't control. Nonsense. But we can only control it if we're on the side of communities, even communities who look at us with suspicion, rightfully so, because we have not aligned ourselves with them. And so the final thing I'll say in this, there's a delegation from the US coming next weekend, and I'm going to invite many of you to a session on Sunday afternoon about the role of civil society in electoral politics. But one of the things that they did in Atlanta and in the Georgia area is civil society decided to get involved in electoral politics because they said they are not going to choose their champion, they're going to choose their opponent. Is that if we're going to have to get across the room with government, we better decide who those people are that we're hiring. We're not getting involved with politics and political spaces because we want to glorify and choose our next Mandela and our next hero and our next champion. We're doing it because we have to choose quality people to sit across the table with for the next 5 years as civil society. If we fail to have honest conversations about who those people are and why they are not us, we will have missed this moment. And so I charge us to think seriously about how we innovate democracy rather than defend it.